visited
Yeah.
soapstone,
Yep.
took some samples, smelled unpleasant smells,
Yep.
high nitrate,
Yep.
and their teacher wrote a letter to DC Water.
Mhm.
Did that have anything directly to do with locating this particular leak?
I mean, directly, it didn't cause us to go out.
That's not why you went.
Right. Well, to be honest, what caused us to go out was Nick calling saying, hey, there's E. coli in the stream. We knew we know still that we have a sewer in the stream that has problems and have done regular inspections on it. As of 6 months ago, we had done tests of this entire stretch, including dye tests, and there wasn't a leak at this point. At 6 months, as of 6 months ago, there was no leak.
So their perception bears on the more general question, going all the way up to Wisconsin Avenue.
It does, exactly.
But not on this particular one.
That's correct.
Thank you.
So just to clarify that last point, the issue right here is not indicative of the problem and the solution that is high E. coli throughout the entire stream. It's indicative of the problem that is that leak at that one location. The high E. coli throughout the stream is going to be something that's happening within this upstream watershed and a combination of the wildlife. We're going to do DNA testing on some of the E. coli samples we can narrow down the we can't get the species, but we can do canine, feline, human, and I forget what category we'll put.
Avian?
Avian, yeah. Geese is actually the third most common.
How about squirrels?
Any other questions on the emergency response before we move on to the capital project? Yes.
So,
we'll go 2 more and then I'll move on.
yeah, so once you've made this repair,
Yeah.
are you going to leave the signs up because of the high E. coli up above the repair? Or do the signs come down and then basically we're back to normal?
That's an excellent question, to which I don't know the answer.
What was the question? Can you repeat it?
Or after this repair, would we take out the signs? So the signs are, I mean, here it is right here. It's avoid contact with the water. So those signs are saying.
Are those specifically because of this one problem that you're repairing? Or are those also because of the since noted high E. coli up above, all the way up to Connecticut Avenue?
So originally it was a response just to the E. coli and kind of the phrase we always use in abundance of caution. Usually, I mean, we're definitely a prime suspect when this kind of an issue happens, so we know to take caution and err on that side. Once we've confirmed that there's nothing in this stretch that's causing that, there's a question as to whether or not DC Water should be notifying the public of that, or there's Park Service and DDOE as well. I'm going to guess that those signs will stay until we've done an investigation throughout this area, but we haven't made that decision yet. The conversation will also happen in coordination with Park Service and DDOE. And there was one more question over here somewhere.
I was just trying to understand if an emergency is 3 weeks, what's regular time for you guys?
Oh, so under a regular repair, we can actually, so a normal response time is about 24 hours to get to the site and stop kind of a normal sized leak. And that means basically having bypass pumps.
Which is what you've done.
Relocated from wherever they happen to be throughout the district. A lot of them are in our yard at the main pumping station. And so leaks are usually stopped within 24 hours. A repair, if it can be done through a traditional open excavation, that's done with equipment and pipe that is stocked in construction yards, not widely throughout the district, but definitely in the suburbs directly adjacent to us. So those repairs can usually be done faster. In this case, since we're choosing a liner, that's something that has to be manufactured, and there's only a handful of facilities in the United States that do that. So it's got to be manufactured, shipped from probably Ohio, and then it'll have to have the resin put into it. So it's more because of the technique that we used.
Very helpful.
And then one more, and then we'll move on to the rest.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment on the signs. Some of the signs are already down. Ones that were closer to Broad Branch and toward, I guess it was the third crossing from Broad Branch. Those signs that had been up are now down.
Right.
Just to let you know.
They've just fallen over from
No,
weather?
they've been
removed.
Yeah, I know.
So Bishop's taking notes
I'm always
and
walking through there, so I know.
Ms. Rat's taking notes, and we'll figure that out because they should still be in.
Yeah, no.
Well, if you have more questions on the emergency, just have them write it down, and Emmanuel and I will pick them up, so we can answer them at the next break.
And as you complete any cars, just raise them in the air and we'll come by and grab them at any time during the presentation.
Or even after the meeting, we're available to answer questions.
So on to the 4 primary points. This is the larger capital project. We came to the public a while back and we presented some information on this, so this is a follow-up to that previous conversation. First 2 things we'll talk about are the project background and the purpose and need. Why are we here? For some of you whose faces I actually am starting to recognize, and some of you who have heard this before, this is repeat information, but there's a little over a mile worth of pipe, 6,200 feet. As Mary Beth stated, they're over 100 years old. And the condition assessments, which originally defined this project, which were completed in 2010, and have been reassessed throughout time, show multiple internal structures, cracks, fractures, holes, breaks. Everybody who walks that part knows that you can see the pipes. Just 1 second.
Is this going to be, for those of us madly scribbling, this is going to get online somewhere where we can
We
get at
are
it?
going to create a PDF, and we'll post that to our website. And then we're also going to give it to the commission, and I believe the Forest Hills Connection is going to post it on their blog.
Well, is that going to be done the next day or 2?
Yeah.
Yeah, the KT.
We'll have the PDF distributed tomorrow morning.
But we got to get it to the Forest Hills Connection right away. So, again, I'm having available tomorrow.
Okay.
Another important component of the project, not directly related to the sanitary sewers, but there are 2 MS4 outfalls. Those are the separate storm drain system. The district, not DC Water, but the district has that permit, and we have an MOA with DDOE, who's responsible for those, to repair quite a large number of those actually throughout the district, and this project includes 2 of those.
So the outfall, for example, that we
Yeah.
would all recognize
Yes.
is
Which there's a picture.
right at Albemarle and 32nd when you
Yeah.
enter the creek, and it's like a pond,
Yeah.
usually a strange shade of green. That's an outfall.
Yeah. And that one in particular is recognizable to us pipeline geeks, because as you stand up on the trail and you're looking 30 feet out and 20 feet down, from there you can see the crack on the top of it, which is big enough to put your hand through. And usually when we're looking at pipes, we're looking for cracks that you can only see from a foot or 2 away. That's a very significant defect, and that entire system right there will be repaired as part of the project.
No,
It-
I think it's 40 feet there. 4 stories.
So this is a map of the project area. The pipes in yellow are the project pipes. So they're running through the main course of Soapstone. It's also all the pipes underneath Audubon Terrace. And you've got this stretch right up here in Albemarle. From the intersection in Connecticut to 32nd Street, and then one that's segment past that. The trailhead is right about there, so it's the next manhole past that. It also includes the pipes in the alleyway between the building that's currently being reconstructed.
Park Connecticut and Park Van Ness.
Park Connecticut and Park Van Ness, thank you. And then it includes this section, and we had this conversation and you told me what the name of that was and I forgot again
The
too.
Van Ness condominium complex, I believe.
Does that sound right? So
Yes.
there's the sewer line coming from this condominium complex as well. And then we also have the line coming off of Linnaean. And then we have this line coming off the back of Lenore, and it runs all the way out to Broad Branch Road. So the scope of the project, that same 6,200 feet, we're here to repair, replace, rehabilitate, or some combination thereof, those pipes. It includes 22 manholes, the 2 MS4 outfalls, as well as any of those sewer pipes that are exposed. They're at risk of falling into the stream, and as debris is coming down the stream during storm events, they're at risk from being hit and leaking based on that. So we need to make stream improvements and/or relocate the pipe, and or protect the pipe in some other way to prevent that damage from occurring, and also preventing erosion from occurring that would completely undercut the entire pipe and have it fall into the street. And then last but not least, we obviously as well need to maintain the function of the park. We can't just close the park for a year and construct a project. So here's a map. The blue arrows represent the 6 locations where sewer flow is coming into the park. This gets important as we start talking about alternatives. So the first one is the big one. This is where the majority of flow comes in right from the intersection of 32nd and Albemarle. The second one is coming off, as we flow downhill, that's the order we're going in, is coming from Park Van Ness and Park Connecticut. And then the third one is coming from the condo building on the south. The third one, the fourth one is coming down 29th and Audubon Terrace. Fifth one is coming off of Linnaean. And the sixth one is coming from the back of Lenore.
Where?
What's that last one?
The back of Lenore? The,
Over
Dutch
by
Embassy?
Hillwood, near Hillwood.
Near Hillwood. And then there are the 2 outfalls that are part of this project. So, recent history, we submitted a draft EA to the Park Service a few years ago.
Environment.
Oh, thank you. An EA stands for Environmental Assessment. It's one of the tools that are used to comply with NEPA. NEPA is the National Environmental Policy Act. It's the act that created the EPA and is also the one under which DC water discharge permits are regulated, and is also the act that requires a full environmental analysis of any projects or these kinds of activities that happen on federal property. And since this is National Park Service property, which is under the Department of Interior, this requires NEPA compliance. At that point in time, we had proposed one action alternative, which was cured in place pipe, CIPP. Pipelining is another way we refer to that. At that point in time, we had not done, either to please Park Service or to please the general public, enough research on exactly how many trees were going to be impacted. We had delineated an area of work where work needed to happen, and based on tree studies, the number of trees that were within that area ranged anywhere from 586 to 812 trees that could have been cut down under the project that was proposed at that point in time. Based on comments, we've revised that, we've looked at that, we've refined it, we've tweaked the construction technologies to I'll explain that a bit. And we've also looked at another alternative, which was specifically requested of us, to reroute all the sewer flow such that it was outside the park. And that's what Alice wants. And it's also that. So we had, we've also now quantified the impacts to trees specifically for both of the alternatives which we're about to present.
Just go back over the next slide. What was the last 2 bullets?
So the per MPS's request, we went back and we defined a second alternative, which is getting the pipes out of the park. We had refined the CIPP, cured in place pipe alternative. Basically, Hazen and Sawyer, Eric in particular, went out and looked at some of the technologies that we had proposed and made adjustments to it that could reduce the number of trees that were impacted. And then the last one is we've done a much more specific and accurate estimate, a specific and accurate count of trees that would be impacted under both alternatives. Before it was based on estimates and rough areas.
Is the trenchless concept part of the second alternative, or is it part of the CIPP, or is it part of both?
Trenchless and CIPP, as we're calling them here, are the same thing. So CIPP, cured in place pipe, we call it trenchless because it's done without the trench, so we don't have to dig the pipe up. And that's where we take the liner, imagine a tube sock, and we invert it through the pipe, inflate it, hook it in place. And that pipe is then there and is a new pipe. And because it's able to go in through the existing manhole, we don't have to dig a trench. So cured in place, CIPP, and trenchless are, at least within this context, same.
Will,
Yes.
is the 586 to 812 number of trees associated with the CIPP or the previous?
That was the previous CIPP.
Okay. And is what you're doing on Audubon now CIPP or something different?
What we are planning to do, and we'll start in a couple weeks, is exactly that same thing.
And why is there such a big trench dug there?
In order to do an investigation with the CCTV equipment that DC Water owns, that's not, the CCTV equipment comes in various scales and sizes. DC Water owns enough equipment to go 600 feet, and contractors can do much longer lengths. So in situations where we know about a longer length that we need to re-inspect on a regular basis, we can do longer lengths. We actually, there's a contractor actually that could do all the way from Albemarle to Broad Branch in just 2 runs. DC Water does not own that kind of equipment. It's just used so infrequently that it works better to contract it out. So in an emergency response, we use the equipment that we have. And what that does, so in order to be able to do that section in particular, we needed to get to a manhole that was buried. So all that excavation work was actually just to unearth that manhole and bring it up to grade. The missing manhole. So something you wanted to add?
Yeah, just as in regards to that excavation. So when we bypassed, or when we, to try to stop the leak, we put our pumps and hoses into one manhole and taking the flow out into the other manhole. But because we had occupied both the suction manhole and the discharge manhole, we didn't have anywhere to go to inspect and CCTV the pipes. So instead of using the because we couldn't use the manholes, we had to dig the hole in the ground to access the pipe, uncover the pipe, and send our CCTV equipment that way. I also have one other question.
So it's sometimes trenchless, not all the time trenchless.
I once gave a presentation at a national conference that was called "What Happens When Trenchless Goes Wrong," and the picture I had underneath it was a big trench.
Right.
So yeah.
There's a question from the comment card here. Do all the pipes run under the road or are any under private property? All the pipes that are in the soapstone project are either in the roadways or in national park property. So none of the pipes in our project area run.
Or property owned by the district.
Or property owned by the district, DDOT property. So none of the pipes that we're talking about here, we're discussing here today, are under private property.
So the real meat and potatoes of why we're here, the 2 concepts. One we're going to call the reroute alternative, which is getting all of the flow out of the park and into basically the surrounding roads. And then the second one will be what we're calling trenchless in these slides. So the first one is reroute. This is going to serve as part of the PDF. This will be distributed. As far as looking at this tonight, if you look at that objective line, that's really where we're going as far as the conversation. Removing sewage flow from NPS property. So here's that map again. Looking at the 6 locations where all the flow comes in. Well, we're going to tone that back to assist with the conversation. There's something in as we relocate a sewer, there's something of a domino effect. And if you were to relocate this line and that line, but not the one in the middle, it doesn't do any good for the line running in the middle of the stream. So we're going to start at the upstream end and basically work progressively down. So in order to remove the pipe that comes in at the trailhead, right at the intersection of 32nd and Albemarle, under this alternative, what we would do is install a new sewer that basically picks up all the flow from that point, runs it over to the trailhead, along the trail, down to the west end of Audubon Terrace, and then underneath the asphalt in Audubon Terrace, install a new sewer that runs all the way down and connects back into the existing system right there. And this pipe is installed just to eliminate that first 527 feet of sewer pipe. So we're installing 3,200 feet of gravity pipe and removing 500 feet. It's a bit imbalanced, and as you'll see, just because of the nature of the way the neighborhood is laid out, it's kind of always going back and forth as to what you're removing and how much you're installing.
Really good. So just when we're talking about removing sewage, we're not talking about physically removing the pipes, we're just redirecting the flow outside the perimeter of the park. So when he's referring to sewage removed, he's talking about taking the flow out. The pipes are still physically in the ground. They just remain abandoned in place. We're not going to use them, but we're redirecting the flow around the perimeter of the park.
And that result in 3,300 feet of pipe, that's all on DDOT right away, right?
It is, yes.
With the exception of a tiny stretch where the park bumps upward, or is there?
This is entirely within DDOT public space.
There isn't any parkland involved in
That is correct.
And it's open cut, excavated installation of new pipe. All that red is digging the ground and putting new pipe.
that. Can you tell us the diameter of the new pipe compared to what's there now?
So this would probably be on the order of 18, might get 15 or so.
It would be an 18-inch pipe.
18-inch pipe, and there's an existing 10-inch in that pipe in Audubon Terrace right now. We'd have to look exactly at the scenarios to know whether that pipe would replace the existing pipe, whether we'd have two.
Right now, the pipe in Audubon Terrace is too high. We'd be coming in
So
a
we'd
lot
have to
lower.
have two.
So it makes the most sense to keep everyone connected to the 10-inch pipe while we install a larger 18-inch pipe, much deeper.
And you told us this is the majority of the sewage flow. Can you give us an idea? Is it 51% or 60%? Roughly how much is it?
It would be greater than about 70% of the flow. When you start looking at some of the tributaries coming in, like this one is very small. This one is just the apartment complex. This is just a small neighborhood coming in. This is, again, just a small neighborhood, and this one's just a couple houses. So when you look at the other 5 points of entry, they're very small compared to what was shown as number 1 is the main stem. We can talk, I'm not sure if you're going to get into some of the constructability concerns of that pipe, but go ahead, you continue.
But there
Would
would
any trees be lost?
Under this scenario, there would be in this area.
So
We're actually going to total that up at the end and tell you and show how many trees. And one of the things that DC Water has to propose, in order to meet the needs of the project, we have to address all the needs within each project that is proposed as a project in any NEPA document, in the document that we would write to Park Service to say, here's what we're proposing doing, here's what the impacts. We have to address all of the needs. So at the end, we'll show what the tree impacts would be to the other 4 steps I'm about to outline.
Just one last question.
Yep.
You stop at one point with the red line.
Yes.
Then there's a lot of 18-inch pipe going all the way to Broad Branch. What happens to that?
I'll get
You
there.
get to
The
that?
impacts is close, yeah. So the second point is the flow coming off the alleyway. The only way to get that pipe out of the flow is basically just back it right back up the alley. And that would require a small pump station placed basically as if you were to drive down the alley, not that you could drive down it right now, but if you were able to get down the alley and where it ends, there's a chain link fence, we would build adjacent to the end of that alley, the existing retaining wall, build a pump station right on the back side of that. And we'll show an image of what that looks like in more detail in 2 slides. And that pump station would take that small amount of flow and basically just push it back up to Connecticut Avenue. It would then run north to Albemarle. Yeah, and then basically back around. So all this flow would basically just do kind of a loop around. And what this pump station and that section of pipe allows us to do is abandon that entire next stretch.
Would that pipe running to Albemarle be under the street or under the sidewalk?
I don't remember.
So we've looked at both at this stage in the design, and there's issues with both, with utilities and metro and that sort of thing. We would probably what we call the cartway, or where the parking lane is of the street. Is the best bet to keep the businesses open as well as maintaining traffic. Connecticut Avenue is an emergency route. There's no route, but it's also emergency for diplomats and president and others. So there's not, we've got a lot of restrictions on that.
So you're saying probably under the street.
Correct. A full investigation of where all the utilities are and the conflicts are underway.
So the third point, number 3, is this part right here. And what we would do is we would install a second pump station right there. We'll have an image of what that would look like in just a minute. And we would route a new force main along this private driveway, which is owned by the condominium association or the property owner there. And this force main would run and connect down in Van Ness. And that would then allow us to abandon the remaining pipe that is in the west half, what we're calling the west half of the park. Put that reminder in there, it should remind me to do something else. Any questions at this point? So here's what the pump station in the back of the alley. This is a plan view. So if you're looking down from a helicopter down on the ground, here's the building that is existing and in place. And here's the one that's currently being constructed. Here's the alleyway. Here's the existing chain link fence, and basically we'd be attaching a building to the end of that, such that if you drive into the alley, you would drive in onto the roof of this pump station, and if you came in from the park side, you would be down 20 feet and driving in at floor level of the pump station. And you can see here some of the equipment that we've got sketched in there. There's valve vaults, a well. We have to have a generator. Pump stations always have to have backup power. And then control panel will be there. A control panel is going to look a lot like the big metal boxes you see at intersections that control the traffic lights and all those kinds of things. It's going to look like that, be a bit beefier and more industrial, but same basic thing.
Do they have odors?
What's that?
Do they have odors?
We get 2 complaints about pump stations. Odors.
Overflows?
No, not so much overflows, but it's basically, yeah, they smell and they're ugly.
How about noise?
And noise is right on that list too, yeah. So one of the things for those living close by, every week or so we have to get, there's a generator, a backup generator, in case the electricity goes out. That generator kicks on automatically, but in order to make sure that that generator can kick on, we have to go exercise it, basically turn it on once a week for about an hour or so, run it, such that when the power goes out, it will automatically kick on, and we test to make sure it's running. But there will always be a motor with a pump spinning, using electricity to push that flow out. It would be a diesel generator that would be used for backup power.
Can you put baffling or something in there to make the noise less?
We can always do that, and I guarantee you'll still complain.
How will did you say this is underground?
It
would be underground? I mean, would we see it or wouldn't we see it?
That's an interesting kind of, from this perspective, you wouldn't see it. You would be looking over its roof. If you were standing in the park, you would be basically when you're looking at the construction site and the existing building that's there, and you see a retaining wall, you would see something that looks kind of like that, except it would be closer to you as part of the building.
Well, can I just expand on the pump station? So the roof of the pump station will house all the equipment. So at surface level will be the emergency generator. The emergency generator will not be underground. It will be at surface level with a sound attenuating shroud around it.
So you'd be able to see that from Connecticut.
Also would be a jib crane. So if anything happened to the pumps, there'll be a crane already mounted there, so the crews don't have to bring a heavy crane out there to pull the pump out to drop a new pump in. And as Will said, there will also be a control panel there. Depending on the size of the generator, we're hoping that the generator will house its own fuel. If not, there will be a separate fuel tank on top of the roof. So that would be what you'd be seeing at the alleyway. From the
From the
park
Connecticut
side, from Connecticut side, from the park side, you would see a large concrete column from the base of the park to the roof of the pump station. And that's where the pumps would be, and the wastewater that's coming from Connecticut as well as an apartment complex would be stored, and once it hits a certain level, the pumps would then turn on to pump the wet well down to a level, kind of like your sump pump in your house. If you've got a sump pump in your basement, you know, it always has some water in it, and then once the float hits, then it pumps all it down. This pump station would act the same way. We would keep sewage in there. When it hits a certain level, the pumps would then pump the sewage out.
Could you hear the noise from the park if you were on the trail?
You would not hear you would
It's
probably
gonna
not hear
comply
the
with-
pumps.
It's going to comply with DC regulations for
Right.
70 decibels at either 80 feet or 100 feet. I forget what the distance is. So
The wall
at that
thickness-
distance would be 70 decibels.
The wall thickness of the concrete will baffle the pumps starting, and there would be submersible pumps, so the motor would be submerged as well, so you would have above ground motors. If the motors were above, you would definitely hear the pumps go off.
So Will, can you give an example of what, can you compare that to something that they hear in the neighborhood all the time, as far as the level of the noise, like a truck or a...
Sure, so the largest noise is not going to come from the pumps turning on or off because of how they're shrouded in the concrete. The noise is going to come from the emergency generator. That's really what's at street level.
It's like a small delivery truck.
A small
driving down
delivery
the
truck.
highway.
If you're sensitive,
Diesel engine.
I'm kind of sensitive. My wife's not. You sometimes hear like the electricity in the wires overhead during like a static day. You might hear that at the pump station, just because it's using so much electricity. You might hear that if you're sensitive to that, but typically you won't.
So to clarify what I was just saying about the truck, that's only when the generator's kicked on.
Correct.
Two questions on the noise. WMATA has a much deeper pump station to take groundwater from the station and
The
pump it
discharge.
up and put it out into the
Discharge is
street.
right about there.
How will the noise of this thing compare to the noise of the WMATA pump?
So it would be not as loud.
Not as well.
Not as loud.
And who hears, okay.
I mean, when I'm in the park,
So we can investigate.
when I'm in the park, I can tell when that discharge is going to come, and because I've got my field crew in there, and you've got a 13-second warning before that water starts rushing out of that outfall.
No, more serious. This public alley is the egress and egress for the parking lots of
Yes.
both buildings. And are you going to use up one lane of that?
No, so
Well, our maintenance crews would actually have to use the whole thing, and we're gonna talk about that a bit on the second site. We would have to have access, independent
Access,
from the other side.
if something is above surface, doesn't that mean the cars won't be able to drive it?
no, it will be beyond the
It's
alleyway.
beyond their park.
So their property ends. You know where the dumpster is? Was.
Oh,
There used to be a
it'll be on the
dumpster.
park side.
It will be on the park side. So construction would happen from the park side. That, because of the egress, of that parking structure, we cannot localize in that area.
So if I'm walking on the sidewalk,
You,
will I see it? Will I hear it? Will I
you'll see it, you'll hear it. You might
smell it?
You might smell it.
Just like the kids from the 5th grade at Sheridan School, when they went down to
Yes.
the park, they smelled the park.
Yes.
And there's also another concern that we're not exactly sure how we would resolve, but the diesel generators have exhaust, and there's new condos out looking over those, so the usual position for an exhaust would be right there. So we'd have to do some kind of a back to get it all the way up to the, which would require attaching. There's a question.
Will, do you have a photo of a pumping station?
Yes.
Ah, fabulous, okay. And is there one that where is Earl's Place? Can we go take a tour of one? And smell it and listen to it?
Excuse me, I'm so confused. Are we talking about the two alternatives and now we're talking about one and then we're going to have a...
Yeah, we're still on the first alternative, which is removing all the pipe from the park, removing all the flow from the park, and and we're still on the first pump station.
And then the second one will be
The lining, the pipe lining.
Okay.
So this is what a pump station of this size looks like, using our standard DC water kind of aesthetic. What you don't see here is kind of the area that we're parked in that always has a maintenance truck coming and going, or at least a couple times a day has one coming and going. And considering that the majority of this building would be facing the park, we would do something aesthetically to make it prettier.
So, yeah, we had a request if we can go through the slides and then wait for questions. Some people are out of time.
That's a very good point. Here's the second pump station. So this is the one behind the, I'm sorry, what's the name of the complex? Condominiums. Basically, a pump station has to be located on a large enough piece of land that's relatively flat and is close to the sewer that we're working on. And this is the relatively close, so we would install a new sewer from that existing over to this pump station, and it would basically have to regrade a portion of the park there. That's a little less than a half an acre, 0.4 acres, something along those lines. And we have the same basic setup that would be farther into the park. Here's a picture of what it looks like, or what existing pump stations of that size look like, I should say. So, in order to construct this, we have identified construction access paths to get to everything that we need to get to in order to build this alternative as a whole. And what we've done is we've counted all the trees within these areas, and we've gone through very accurately. Eric at one point in time had teams out there with 2x4s that were the width of trucks walking through, seeing if they could squeeze between trees to get a much more accurate count of exactly where we were and weren't going to be impacting. This portion in blue, in order for this pump station to be located there, and as a result of the ingress, egress, and safety issues, and a number of other just maintenance issues, that would actually have to become a permanent road. We're not talking asphalt or anything like that, but it would have to be some combination of road base or gravel, something along those lines, that would allow us uninterrupted access. Not that we would need it uninterruptedly, but for an emergency basis, we would always need to be able to get there. So there'd be a permanent road coming from the end of Audubon Terrace where it's paved, right? The pavement stops right there, and we would basically drop down to the park.
Approximately free.
Yeah. Here's the picture of the outfall that we were talking about earlier. This is the graph I was talking about, and when you walk in, you're standing up here looking down at that. Farther east in the project, we have these areas highlighted in yellow. This green is all park property. Everything within that area is National Park Service. Along here is DDOT property. And these yellow areas are area where we're proposing what we call asset protection, which is also, you all would look at it and probably call it a stream improvement, where we would reconfigure the stream to protect the sewer in its existing location. Basically prevent the erosion, bury it enough so that it's protected again from any falling objects or erosion in the stream. What that's going to look like, what it looks like right now is you see these pipes crossing like this. You see a manhole there. Some of you, as you walk through, might not even see it because it's just, it just, in some cases, it looks kind of just like the gravel at the bottom of the stream. But there's our pipe right there, and there's our pipe right there. Before and after.
Keep going a couple of slides.
Okay. We'll show a before and after picture in a bit. So here are impacts to trees under this first alternative. So under the pump station alternative, there would be an impact. This top number is all trees, whether it be on park property, DDOT property, or any other. 449 trees would be either trimmed or cut, some combination thereof. And then impacts to trees within the park itself, national park property, would be 148. Pump station related impacts, specific to the pump stations themselves, there's about a half an acre of permanently impacted area. We would have to acquire property. We don't have to acquire the property from DDOT because that's already in general taken care of. But we would also have to acquire property from NPS and the private condominium owner, because we would be installing a sewer line along that driveway. There's always the noise in the exhaust from the emergency generators. Increased presence of DC water. Our maintenance crews are going to have to go maintain this pump station on a regular basis. And the permanent road crossing. So as you get down into that stream, we need to be able to drive a maintenance truck, not one of the real big trucks, but a work truck, a pickup with all the stuff on the back, the big heavy truck that we would need to be able to drive across that. So that would be a permanent road crossing.
That road crossing is not part of the half-acre impacted at the top.
No.
That's in addition to the half-acre.
Yeah. So in here, impacts related to the road, which is actually maybe answering the question that you were dealing with as well. So there's another quarter acre there. We would have that stream crossing. In order to drive equipment across, there would probably be a concrete ford, but there's some details to work out on that stuff. And then because of the pump station itself, we can't replant the trees that we cut down where there's a pump station now. So those would be trees that would be permanently lost. We would plant them elsewhere in the park, obviously, but there would be permanent removal of vegetation at the pump station site.
Elsewhere in Soapstone or elsewhere in Rock Creek Park in general?
That's a detail we have to work out. Soapstone doesn't have a lot of room for new trees, which is a good thing. I mean, there's lots of places for us to plant trees. So that's the first alternative. That's pump stations. Now we're going to talk a bit more about the cured-in-place pipe alternative, CIPP. We're also calling it trenchless. The objective here is to use trenchless to repair the defective infrastructure. This is going to be similar to what we've talked about at previous meetings. Here's a map of the site again. We would use the trenchless alternatives, and most paths would be access paths. During construction would be 16 feet wide. We'll show a picture of what that looks like. Excuse me, in just a minute. And there's two types, one for heavier equipment and one for light equipment. And at locations where the access paths across streams, we would have to use temporary bridges to be able to cross those. Here is what a light access path looks like. This is what we call a silt fence in essence. It's wooden stakes pounded into the ground with some silt, some fabric that runs along there that prevents the silt from washing off site. And all of our construction equipment would be held within that. And this is basically mulch that we would import. And then for the heavier equipment, the mulch gets a little bit thicker, and
There's
we have
also
plywood on top of that. So earlier we were showing you some of these access paths, and here at the north end, we're showing you where some of those would be. Next couple slides show a few more.
Do you have the same access paths on either alternative?
Similar, though not identical.
At some point, could you go over that map and explain which is which alternative?
Sure. So, can I jump in?
That's actually, I think we can handle that. We've got construction plans for both alternatives.
Okay.
We could give you that, and you'd actually be able to flop back and forth.
It's not how you want to do it, but just confusing.
So this is showing more areas where, under this alternative, under the CIPP, there's more pipe in the park, so there's more stream to be restored to protect the existing pipe. So here we've got that entire area where the existing pipes are up in the air, and as you walk down in, they're up quite a bit, and you can stand and you can walk on them. This whole area would have to be improved to raise the stream up and protect the pipe from erosion, and we'd have to do it at these other two locations as well. And then that's 4, 5, 6, and 7.
These access roads would be not permanent.
That's correct. These are temporary access roads. And here are a couple more pictures of pipe that is not necessarily visible to everybody unless you're really looking for it. Here's a before and after picture of what a typical stream improvement might look like. So here's an exposed sewer pipe on a previous project. It's not in DC, but it's the same basic process. And we would construct this rock boulder cross vein, and that pipe right now is behind there. So this protects it from erosion, and then it basically allows the pipe to stay in place. Under this alternative, the tree count, before we had a much higher number, Eric's gone back in and kind of redoubled the efforts. We spent, looked in much more detail at the specific trees. The total tree count under this alternative would be 379 trees that are either trimmed or cut. Still a pretty big number, to be honest.
Well, can you define what a tree is, size-wise? So what we consider a tree is anything that is 10 centimeters or greater. So when you look at the 310...
If you do this with your fingers around it, it's not a tree.
Right.
If it goes like that, it's a tree.
So
depending on the size of your hands.
So when you look at 310, it's not the ones that you go out there and hug. They're included, but they're also the smaller trees in some of the more dense areas. So that's why the number seems a little bit higher when you think of the park. A lot of people think of those 18-inch guys.
How many trees greater than 18 inches DBH?
I don't have that number off the top of my head. I wish I did. I'm sorry.
So this alternative does have a greater area of impact on a temporary construction basis, but it is a smaller area in the other. Here's a summary of the tree impacts. Previously we had told you 586 to 812. Now we have reroute alternative and CIPP alternative. Under the reroute we've got 449 and under CIPP 379.
I think originally it was 1,200, actually, at some point.
What explains the big difference between 2012 and 2015?
Basically, Eric's crew going out and doing a much more granular approach to looking at the plants.
You just did a better study?
A more detailed study. One of the things that we were looking at back then was using smaller equipment that can ride on narrower trails, but smaller equipment can't push a liner as far and those kinds of things. So Eric has actually done an evaluation under multiple scenarios where if we just use our traditional size equipment, we can reach much farther. And even though that path is now wider, it's impacting a smaller number of trees overall. And Eric probably has one or two things to add to that.
So back in 2012, the number of manholes that we were getting to was a lot greater in terms of our ability to line from. One of the benefits we have right now is WSSC is spending millions upon millions of dollars and pushing their contractors further and further on a larger scale program in their parks. And these contractors are now able to line a lot further than they did back in 2012 or even yesterday. So we're taking a lot of their lessons learned and applying them here. So instead of having to get to every manhole or every 200 feet or every 400 feet, now we can get to every 1,000 feet, every 1,200 feet. So when you start looking at that, instead of lining 200 feet at a time, lining 1,200 feet, it's great. Now, some of the numbers when you look at the pump station versus the CIPP, the numbers seem to be kind of almost even. You have to remember we also have the MS4s, so F117 and F140. In either scenario, we still have to get there to repair those. So that's what's also bringing up some of the numbers or some of the access paths, David, where you said aren't there similar access paths. You're absolutely right, because there's still assets that are not part of the CIPP project or not part of the sanitary project that we have to get to still.
So one quick, you said it pays the way. To a degree, yes, but if we have any more defects, probably not so much. If we have any more failures where it's overflowing, not so much.
Okay,
yeah. This is a very detailed breakdown with the intent of being part of the PDF that you all will be able to read later. The thought here, though, is we've got a reroute concept and a CIPP concept. We do see a pretty significant list of permanent impacts as compared to a smaller permanent impact because of the pump stations themselves. And they're all the things that we've already been talking about. But it's a summary list.
And no pumping stations with CIPP, you're just going to let the water flow where it's flowing.
Right. All the work's happening by gravity. Right. So here's a quick summary of kind of the high-level pros and cons. Under a reroute concept, There is no more flow in the west half of the park. To be honest, DC Water doesn't want pipes in the park because we can't get to them and maintain them on a regular basis. It makes our operations more expensive and more difficult. So that, in general, is a benefit. The con, though, is we've got these pump stations maintained. There's more permanent impacts. There's more linear footage of pipe. The more feet of pipe we have is just the more stuff to maintain and manage, and there are more trees that are in.
Excuse me, under the rewrap concept, you're basically talking about digging up the length of Audubon Terrace, is that correct?
Yes.
I'm against that.
There are those last couple.
Well, there you go, the meeting's over.
When you come off 29th and turn to the right, the road is quite a bit skinnier. So those last two homes, I don't know if I don't know if you're one of those last two
They
homes.
belong to very close friends of mine.
They would be. You would have to park farther away from your house just because that road is skinny enough that we'd be taking up that
Well, I
entire.
can tell you this, the people in the last house can't park further away. They won't be able to get to their house unless you come give them a ride because they are quite elderly. Really, the last two.
Yes.
Well, I remember when in 2012, when we talked about the smaller vehicles going in,
Yeah.
that there were going to be 100 trees or so, I think it was even less, that were going to be impacted. So this is quite a bit more. What's the downside of using the smaller vehicles? I know that the length.
The 100 count was probably related to just the CIPP itself.
Correct.
And that did not include any of the stream improvements or the MS4 work. What was the second question though?
What's the downside of going in with smaller vehicles if you impact the tree, if there's less impact on the trees?
Because you have to drive more length within the park. So you have to get to each manhole with this technology. So with the bigger equipment, you can skip manhole number 2, 3, 4. With the smaller equipment, you can only skip manhole number 2. So you've got to drive to 3.
But would fewer trees be impacted?
No,
Other way around.
unfortunately.
Which is why we're proposing that under this alternative. Can I just go one more bottom here and then I'll go back. Under the CIPP concept, the pros and cons, under the CIPP, there's no permanent impact that is not already there, meaning the pipe is already there. So if all the impacts can be replanted, basically. They can be restored in place. And there's fewer trees impacted. The downside is obviously we've got to be in that park and impacting the park on a short-term basis much more significant.
How long does it take?
I have a comment question.
Okay. Okay.
So it said, what is the lifetime of pumping stations and the lifetime of the pipeliners? We would say they're about comparable, about 50 years, but the pipeliners, we say they're rated at 50 years of service life because the technology is relatively new and it hasn't been in existence for that long, so they can't really, even though they, whoever, the people who rate this know that it will probably last more than 50 years, they can't go ahead and say more than 50 years, but that's, officially, that's around the same range. But
That's plenty for me.
When we come back and talk about this 50 or 100 years from now, it will be all of our grandkids talking to all of our other grandkids. So next steps, in September, we will be ready with a draft environmental assessment that will be sent to Park Service. That will not be distributed for public review yet. There'll be a couple of review cycles between DC Water and Park Service. And then this is all plus or minus because, with this kind of thing, is as soon as you start getting out there a few steps, it's always plus or minus. So we're hoping to have something out in January. And so you all can provide comments right now, but this will be an official public review period. We'll be coming back out presenting more details that are all in the environmental assessment. So there are a couple of charts.
yeah.
Can you go to the overall picture of the park and address some of the questions?
So I have a, in the meantime, sorry. That's, what did you?
That's actually a good one right there, Will.
Okay. Yep. So there was a question of will the large outfall pipe that's right at Albemarle and 32nd will that be repaired under this project? The answer to that is
Yes, but a follow-on on that was about the sidewalk. So you've got F-117 right here, which I keep calling it F-117, it's the outfall with the big crack on it.
Get
But
your
also
feet on it
there's
every now and then.
the failing sidewalk here, as well as bank erosion in this location. So the question is sidewalk above the big pipe at 32nd and Albemarle that is collapsing, will this be repaired? And the answer is yes. Under this scenario, both the scenarios, both the pump station or the CIPP, the intention is to repair the sidewalk, the failing sidewalk here, and the erosion issue here. We've got a couple concepts out to DC Water in terms of actually making almost an overlook at that location, kind of rerouting the sidewalk and helping bringing the public out to see the park a little bit better at that location. And then we're looking at, and we're working with the DC Water to do some sort of bank stabilization and erosion control there. Whoever's been doing it, thank you very much. Maintaining the wooden steps has been very helpful. But that would be.
Alexander, go
Thank
Alex.
you. Every time I'm out there, it's amazing that the care of this park from the community is amazing. So we want to make sure that's addressed as well.
So, and this is another aspect that shows one of the interesting aspects of this project. We're coordinating with Park Service, we're coordinating with DDOE relative to the stream in general. But this component right up here with that sidewalk is actually a coordination with DETA. So we've got basically all the agencies that do this kind of heavy infrastructure involved.
Yeah. The next question is about cost. And we're standing here trying to remember the cost of the pump stations versus the CIPP. They were, the pump stations were obviously higher. I don't have the numbers. We can get those.
we can get them for you, we just don't have them.
Yeah, I apologize.
In the realm of NEPA compliance, where we're putting together an environmental document like this, the mandate from the legislation is that we evaluate the environmental impacts. So we're comparing environmental to environmental, and the cost under NEPA is a secondary concern. Now, obviously, if one alternative is $1 million and the other one's $100 million, that's a different story.
Who and when will the alternative be selected?
So who is, we're not going to construct anything that we don't want to construct, and Park Service is not going to issue a permit for anything they don't want us to construct. So it'll be a mutual decision. Who and when will the decision be made?
Yes.
The decision would be made after this public, I'll go into my presentation, after the public.
January 2016.
What do we call that? The public hearing? No, it's not a public
So
hearing.
let's say there's a
Public comment period.
Let's say the public comment and the general vibe that you're getting is almost overwhelmingly in favor of the CIPP. How influential is that? I want to hear very much.
Actually.
I don't know.
Actually, when we're dealing with NEPA and the National Park Service, we do not consider it a lottery. It's not a popularity contest. We look at the environmental impacts and make our decisions then based on those impacts to our resources.
I have a bunch of comments here. Some of them are being addressed as Will was responding to them. So we're just going to take turns. Comment here about why we believe the cured-in-place pipe is reliable and how long do we think it will last. I think the service life is about 50 years, as we've described before.
The technology's been around just a tad bit longer than that, and when we go to industry conferences and we talk about some of these original case studies and people are pulling them up doing tests on the stuff that was installed 50 years ago, which was an inferior, to be honest, quality compared to what we have now, and a lot of it's still doing really well. So it is a tested technology.
And can it be ruptured by roots or shifting ground? I mean, we're putting it in there because it's almost as if putting a new pipe within the existing pipe. So all the industry leaders are very confident of the integrity of this technology. But because we don't manufacture it, we can't necessarily guarantee.
And the reason this one works specifically as it pertains to roots With a traditional clay pipe, there's a joint every 3 feet. And roots, they're looking for that nutrient-rich water, which is inside the sewer, and they can get in there. With this liner, there's no joints, so there's no point for the roots to start. And for anybody who's walked on, well, even the sidewalks right up along Albemarle, the trees are going to win every time. It's concrete versus a root. The root's just going to pop the sidewalk up. It's the same for the pipes.
How many times do you actually have broken by roots? I mean, it's not the same. It's not the same thing for various reasons, which D-Dot could argue with you. But what's your experience with roots actually breaking a pipe?
In this project,
You mean soapstone or in general?
Soapstone specifically, D-Dot and DC Water's experience generally. We asked you that question 2 years ago, and you didn't answer it then. What did you do to answer it?
We can go back to the records of, so when we do our condition assessment, every time there's a root intrusion, it is marked in the report. We can do a query and see how many times a root
What about these fine roots? I'm talking about something that's big enough. Right?
So, a pipe broken by a root, like a tap root is what we call, we can search for tap roots versus spine roots versus root balls or that sort of thing.
So with my responsibility over a pretty large number of projects at DC Water, in 2.5 years, I've had 20, 25 conversations within projects about specific roots that are bigger than my thumb, specifically causing problems. And those are just the ones that get to my attention. There's going to be a handful of others. So out of the 1,800 miles of sewer that we have in the district, on a percentage basis, I don't know, but it's definitely a legitimate problem.
How much time does it take to do each of these two alternatives?
So I'm going to...
You have to, okay, so you have a similar question.
Yeah.
There are similar questions geared towards potential schedules between the two alternatives and how long they might take. So could you address that with?
Yeah, Eric's trying to signal.
I was just going to say we have a question that Nick was going to answer.
So the question was asked, how do you protect new vegetation that's planted from field browsing? And we have a variety of methods to do that, but oftentimes, like we've done in some of our projects, we fence around the tree, so the deer can't necessarily get to the vegetation. We'll plant trees that are big enough so that they won't be able to necessarily browse. And as you know, we're doing deer management in Rock Creek Park. So as time goes on, that will hopefully be less and less of an issue.
So to get to the construction schedule, I'll read this and then I'll probably answer at least a few parts. When did construction happen? So we've got to go through the compliance standpoint, and then we've got to finish up our design, get it out to bid. Procurement regulations, basically at DC Water, in order to meet all the procurement regulations, it takes 6 months from the time we finish the design until we actually start construction. We're anticipating early 2017 to start construction. How long it would take would depend significantly on the alternatives. Cured in place pipe would take on the order of 4 to 6 months, and pump stations would take on the order of 1 to 2 years.
Metro quality time.
What is the staging area for both alternatives? So the staging area is actually shown for both alternatives within these impacts areas.
Yes.
That's actually not entirely true because there's some of the roads that are also impacted.
Correct. So staging for CIP is on the truck. We bring the trucks in with the liner that's already what we call impregnated. They already have the resin in there. We'll have the other boiler trucks there. So staging, as you might think of in construction, where they bring like all the material in and drop it off and then move it, for the lining, is all self-contained. When we start talking about streams...
Can I hold up on that
Sure.
for just a second? So imagine like the largest size U-Haul truck that would exist. That's going to back up to, in a roadway, each of the manhole sections. And then on the other side, you're going to have some trucks that are still big trucks, boiler trucks and those kinds of things. Something that requires a CDL to drive is going to be kind of parked back to that. So you'll have both of these trucks parked back to back on either side of the manhole. So each manhole will have a staging area around it.
So that was my question. So the trucks would not be on Audubon Terrace or Albemarle Street. They would be on the so-called Joe's Road.
So
they would get down. That's an example.
So
they would get down into this area.
So there would be a truck on Albemarle. So the first point of entry into the park is at 32nd and Albemarle. So that manhole would be a lining manhole. So we're going to shoot 1,200 feet from that manhole as far into the park as we can. If that point, then we need to enter the park to see where that liner ended at 1,200 feet, and line from that point to another 1,200 feet. At that point, we're now in Audubon Terrace. So the good thing, once we get to Audubon Terrace, is that at that point, we're able to shoot the liner upstream. Now, typically, you want to go from high down, you want that gravity and that head. But if the pipe differential is under 6 feet, you can shoot upstream. So there's only one section of pipe in this whole project that I can shoot upstream, and it happens to be the one section I need it to be, which is good. So that's from Audubon Terrace. We're going to shoot upstream, and then we're going to do a very short length downstream. The reason we want to do a short length downstream is it's that last length of pipe we want to get as far into the park as possible. Sure. Sure. So we're gonna shoot from this manhole.
So this is Audubon Terrace, and the asphalt is stopping.
Right. So there's a manhole here. We're gonna shoot up to a manhole here, which we end. We're then gonna shoot from here. Again, when I say shoot, we're gonna line. I start geeking out when I get here. We're gonna go all the way to about this point. If we do the full 1,200, we get all the way here, and that's a lot of trees to impact. But if I do a short length to here, I can use that existing trail that's pretty wide already to get my trucks there. Don't even have to enter National Park Service. And I can now go from here all the way to here, which is incredible. I can get out of the park. And one of the questions was, are we going to be accessing from Broad Branch? The trail in that section is very narrow. Yes, we will be accessing from Broad Branch. We'll be coming in here to Broad Branch. And what we'll have to do is, if you know where the fence line is, and there's like a little wooden bridge, and it's about this thin, we actually cannot be on the trail there. So we're actually going to have to build a road and a ramp in the stream to get us past a temporary, past that area to get back on the trail for that one little area right here, and be able to line from there to there.
There's another section further to the west from there where the stream bank has been eroding very quickly.
Yes.
Where you'll have to dig into the stream bank and then I guess build retaining walls.
So that area is right here. I don't have to drive there. All my work there is for manhole rehabilitation. So when I've got to get to a manhole, I just need to get someone strong that can carry in a framing cover, a wheelbarrow, some cement, some water, and we go to the manhole, we set up a tripod, and we can repair it without machinery. If I can bring mules in, I'll bring mules. But now we're talking another E. coli source, so I'm not sure about that.
Alex is probably too talking though about that erosion that's happening right along the trail in that stretch. And there's some improvements planned for that as well.
Right. So there are improvements there, and like Will was saying, these yellow spots are where asset protection would be needed. We've got smaller zero-turn bobcats that can get in there. Back to the staging area. So for the CIPP lining, I don't need staging area. All the staging is contained in the trucks. When I talk about asset protection and I need to bring in the big boulders to bring in what those cross veins look like that will show the pipe and then the trapezoid, we're going to need to bring in and dump in an area. The good thing is these areas that need stream protection are pretty big. So I can dump my rocks in this area, in this corner, and then move them pretty easily within that contained area. So the staging areas, the access roads are all included in the tree counts.
Do you plan on building any retaining walls in places as you build your access paths or widen them?
Not retaining walls in the...
Or are they temporary walls?
The crossfade is, technically speaking, a kind of a retaining wall, right? But probably not in the sense that everybody's seeing.
Two questions on the CIPP. If 60 years, 70 years later, it's wearing out, can you put in another CIPP layer inside the CIPP?
2 years ago, I said no. In the last 2 years, I've been proven wrong. There are case studies where people are doing it, and it's actually worked.
That's what you would do.
Yeah.
Or that we might, or you're successful.
Or we might install compostable toilets throughout the entire water.
And second, when we met a couple of years ago, you had a third alternative, which is what you then called trenchless. That you could do Audubon Terrace without digging up Audubon Terrace. You could put in a new pipe.
Correct. And we
What
are.
happened to that alternative?
So the pipe that we need to put into Audubon Terrace under trenchless can be done without digging up Audubon Terrace. That's still the case today. Now,
But where is that? That's not either of your two alternatives.
it is. So when we talk about,
You told us you were going to block this poor guy from his house.
so that's, so sure. So that if we have to build the pump station and we have to put a gravity main from Albemarle down the, what I call paper road trail to Audubon Terrace, we would have to build and put in a new pipe.
I understand that, but can you do that trenchlessly the way you told us to use it?
We could, at that point in time, you have a traditional pipe that's being installed in a road, and you basically have, it's at a depth that open trench is feasible, so it's basically from a construction standpoint, they're both feasible. There's just a cost difference on an order of magnitude of about 10. So one is $50 a foot, and the other is $3,000 a foot. You could.
We might want to see what that is.
So that would be under the pump station alternative. If the pump stations move forward, we would then look at the different methodologies to construct the gravity sewers and the force mains required to move that option
We
forward.
would want a minimum inconvenience for the people living there, and the question is, what can be done, how much does it cost, et cetera. On the pump stations, if you could reduce by, say, 50% the amount of fluid that goes through them, would that have an appreciable effect on construction time, noise, anything else?
So the pump station size is, we're right on the cusp. So the small, there's less flow, everybody thinks that the pump station is going to be smaller. The pumps are going to be smaller, the motor's going to be smaller, the footprint not necessarily.
It's still based on people being able to maneuver around it and work safely in an environment with equipment.
So the size of the pump station doesn't change, like the footprint. The pump would. We would use less electricity. We would have smaller pumps. The generator might be smaller because my motor's smaller. But in terms of the footprint or the impact, we're not talking anything significant.
Coming back to my trenchless construction on, say, Audubon, gravity but no open trench.
Right.
Are you going to give us in the EA an analysis of that option?
We're not planning it.
Well, why not?
Just because there's, from an environmental standpoint, as a comparison, the NEPA document is written around environmental impacts, and the difference there is it's going to fall under a social impact to a couple of the residents there, and to be honest, we're talking a few $1 million. I mean, we could hire a taxi service to drive a little go-kart to get people back and forth, and it would still be 1,000 times cheaper.
They're going to say something so many words. You decline it.
And now we can do it. Well,
Look,
that's an important part.
The delay that's taken place has apparently really produced dividends. And that the CIPP thing can be done more efficiently, at much greater length.
Yep.
And so while you may have been kicking yourselves, it took so long, to some extent you benefit.
Yes.
Possible.
As the park.
The same thing may happen on trenchless, so it seems to me you ought to at least raise it, and if you want to knock it down, knock it down. But I see it.
So, and part of the NEPA document has to have well, I don't know what it has to have, but it usually has a section on alternatives that were considered and eliminated. And we actually have that in that section.
We do. I mean, if there's a strong need for pump stations, and it's a strong pro for pump stations, we could look at minimizing the impacts to the force main construction or the gravity construction.
Either way, it'll be described in there. It's just a question of whether or not it gets the full analysis of the comparison with every single tree that would be impacted, and every single home that would be impacted, versus a couple of pages of why it doesn't make sense compared to the alternatives that are described in more detail. Before we go to any more comment cards, question cards? We got through all this, so we're basically
I
on.
think we did.
If we didn't address your, because I sort of lumped some of the questions into one.
Let me just ask you one question. You
Wait,
raised.
David, there are other people, okay. Listen.
I'm running an article.
It's part of this environmental impact comparison in terms of trees and road beds that need to be constructed. Is consideration given to 2 diesel-powered generators belching diesel smoke for half an hour once a week each, as well as smell of pumping stations?
Could you go over the design or the location of that second pumping station near the condominiums?
The location, so here's Connecticut, Van Ness is down, there's VZ, and Van Ness is probably actually down around there. There's the condo complex, there's the driveway to go around back, you see the swimming pool. That pump station would be right there.
Is that, how will that impact the units facing that pumping station? Will they be able to smell it?
It's actually going to be a little ways off the asphalt.
I think if you park your car next to it, you might, but I think if you're in your building, the building you belong. You'll be far enough away.
Probably true.
Could you talk a little bit more about how you hope to eliminate the exposure of assets, and then how you hope to reconfigure the stream in places? The image that you showed was one where the pipe really didn't cross the stream, and in the case of Soapstone Valley, nearly all of the exposed assets that are in the stream actually cross it. So it's going to be a little more difficult than just pushing something off to the side.
Yeah, so I'll pull this up and I'll show you where the pipe would be in a crossing situation. So right underneath here, there's a rock wall, boulder wall, just like that, except it's all covered in water. So if that pipe were crossing the stream perpendicular, you would basically take this point, come back 10, 50, or 40 feet, and then that pipe would be crossing back behind it. So in this photo, it would actually be down around here.
And then you would be putting in cross veins above it to funnel the water down toward the middle and protect the banks.
Correct.
And one of the problems that we have, is with the exposure when you first come in off of 32nd and Albemarle, there's the kind of big network of pipes that are all exposed. They're so far up in the air now that each of those cross veins, because this is a fish passable stream, but we want to maintain that. We don't want to create the barricade that wouldn't allow fish to migrate up. So each of those cross veins can only step up 9 or step down. It's going to be 9 or 12 inches or so. So what we show here is a few feet, and because we're only going, I believe it's 9 inches. There's going to be a series of them, and they'll actually tie in together.
You're going to have to do some significant digging in that area.
Hence, probably half the trees that are impacted are in that area. And if you imagine, there's a lot of the trees that are on the existing bank right now that some of them are starting to lean, but there's actually not that many right in that area that are leaning. Although it's been a couple months and this does change from time to time. Some of those are pretty big trees that have the root wads sticking out into the stream, which is what's the only thing protecting the stream right now. As we reconfigure that, that's going to be where the big trees that are impacted are. Those are going to be the ones that would be impacted.
And you excuse this one other thing. I'm from Arlington, and we've done a lot of stream restoration, in particular on Donaldson Run. And one of the things that we found there is that often in the first year's plantings, many of them fail. You have issues with maintenance, and often you have to go back and reinstall plantings, protect them further. So is there a plan for maintenance of the plants that you're going to have to put in once this is done to stabilize the bank?
And it's the first year is a very critical part in that. So every contract that we have has a 1-year warranty period, and specific to vegetation, we're going to require at least at a minimum, we'll see what Nick says in just a minute, but we would require, just by default on any project that we do, that the contractor maintain that vegetation for a year. So if it's dry and it's not raining enough and the plants haven't taken root yet, they're going to be bringing water out to water.
Or more likely in soapstone, it's going to get washed away into the flood. Because
And then they'll be
constantly-
replanted.
Would you
It-
consider 2-year maintenance agreement?
Actually, the Park Service would issue a permit to DC Water in order to do this work after the environmental assessment was completed and we made a decision about what alternative to do. We would build into that permit a maintenance period where they'd be responsible for continuing to maintain whatever structures they would put into soapstone. So we can make that period for up to 5 years and make it renewable.
During a CIPP project, what happens to the existing sewer? How do you handle that?
It's all bypassed, similarly to what's out there right now with the hoses that are, that big around or so. The bypass that we would need to do for the main line that's running through the valley of the stream would actually have to be a bit bigger. The pumps and the generator that's out there would actually be probably about the same size, though there'd probably be a second one as a backup. But you could imagine what's out there right now, but just kind of a little bit bigger.
And would that be in 1,200-foot lengths, or would you have to do the entire stream at one time?
So that gets into contractually and legally. If there's any construction attorneys in the room, they'll attest to this. There are certain things that we can tell a contractor to do, and there are certain things that are up to means and methods is the legal term. And your question falls squarely into contractors' means and methods. Cost effectively, they usually find it cheapest and best just to get the whole thing set up so they can just watch it run and then do all the work. Different projects kind of fall different ways. And this one will depend on how fast the contractor thinks he or she can line under the lining alternative from one end to the other. If they can do the whole thing in 2 weeks, they're going to set up that whole bypass in one step.
On the construction time for the rerouting of 1 to 2 years, how much of that is actually trenching open on Audubon Terrace? And how much of that is the construction of the pump station?
I was actually assuming that would be done in parallel.
Yes.
But I'll let you answer.
How long does it take you to do Audubon Terrace? How long is it?
So that's 3,200 feet,
50 feet a day?
50 feet a day.
So 3,200 divided by 50 is 60? 64? 64 working days, and that's assuming a contractor at full productivity. So we usually double that, just
Right. And not hitting any, we haven't done a full geotechnical, so we don't know what that rock
Just
is.
give us a feel. I'm saying,
120 days.
120 days.
Correct.
Not necessarily.
so working day. That's 6 months.
Right.
And is there any way to shorten the pump station time, like prefabricated stuff and so on?
So,
this side probably actually.
so the pump station at the foot of the alley would have to be poured concrete pump station. We would have to form it against that alleyway and ensure that the alleyway doesn't collapse upon it. It would have to be its own freestanding structure, not structurally dependent on anything around it. So it would be freestanding. The one by the apartment complex, that could be a precast manhole structure, potentially like a round triplex structure that we could dig in, have that structure cast in, already cast out in the field, and then just drop it in. So that pump station would, yeah, that construction would be a lot quicker, just because we could bring in some prefab equipment for that. So we are out of time. Beyond that,
Let me just say,
Sure.
I think you all would be very receptive to hearing more community
Most
comments.
definitely.
What's the best way for people to communicate with you?
Emmanuel, I was going to say
No, not
email
tonight,
BizRap,
but in the future.
But do you have a different answer other than emailing BizRap?
No, I mean, well, for opportunity to happen is, they can send comments to me. I mean, I would just be the phone to to you guys, I mean, certainly, if you want to do it
So
that
would you
way.
mind announcing your email address?
So my email address is Emmanuel.Briggs, I'll spell it out for you, EMANUEL dot Briggs, BRIGGS at dcwater.com. So if you have concerns, you can email them to me
And a copy of the PowerPoint PDF will be posted on your website, and there'll be a link through the Forest Hills Connection. We'll probably also put it up on the ANC 3F website, if anybody would like that.
If we look at it, in the subject line of emails, just so your email, I know you've got so many projects.
Just
What's the
about-
best
yeah.
subject line people should use so you can flag them pretty quickly?
I mean, you could say soapstone inquiry, soapstone project inquiry, as long as it's soapstone, and the fact that there's a question that you need an answer to, that will let me know I need to funnel that to Will and get responses and get back.
Great, and I'd like to thank Emmanuel thank you all for being here, and you know, we as a community do have a voice, and we can make a difference, and I think that Will and everybody up here would agree that we've made a difference so far. So don't be shy. I know you won't be.
Anybody want to?
Thank you.